Well, once again, welcome. Hi, guys. How you doing? Well, today we have a new podcast on, story of pop. Remember? We've been talking about the beginnings of this all-time classic music genre that involves many other types of music. And when we talk about music, we always talk about pop, of course. Not about classical music, but pop music. The first thing that you can refer to is you say pop came from the term, I said it before in the last podcast, popular music. And it has remained the term for music that is popular within the public or the masses, if you want to sound more like left wingy. Well, and anyway, pop is even has a wider definition. So today we're going to keep on digging into this very interesting history, because on the last episode we talked about the 40s. I forgot about Bing Crosby. I talked about the Rat Pack, I don't know, Glenn Miller, or Tommy Dorsey, Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, and the Rat Pack. Well, and I never said anything about the king of pop in the 40s, who was Bing Crosby. Now, once I said this, let's go back to this. We've been talking about the 40s, then the 50s, Peggy Lee, Frank Sinatra, Doris Day. Well, great. Now we come into the 60s. What can I say about the 60s when look at this beautiful guys, Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons, the Beach Boys. Remember, we're talking about this from an American point of view. If you want to, I can talk about the European pop music, which was slightly different in the process. But now we're in the 60s, everybody is hip. That was the word, hip. And at the beginning of this decade, nothing, like always, nothing changed so much. So the early 60s, you can still see this country crossover artists. And we see, okay, the Four Seasons, like an American band, and the Beach Boys. But the success of these guys didn't last longer because the Beatles started to appear in America. This was called the British invasion. There was a bunch of rock and roll, pop, whatever you call it, rock and roll bands, and the Beatles were the all-time record makers, because I don't know how to say it. Yes, they did everything. They even had 5 songs on the top 5 spots in 1 week on the Billboard Hot 100. So that's quite a reference. Nobody could beat this record. By 1962, this British band started playing, but well, a couple of years later, it was a huge success in America. So after the Beatles, there was like a bunch of British bands, very interesting bands. I strongly recommend you the Animals, the Kinks, the Moody Blues, or well, even more rockish bands like Cream. Well, not yet, because this is the 70s. Well, the success of the Beatles for me is like, the definite settlement of the rock pop music into the culture. And from that point, everything changed. In 1964, they had the first hit, I Want to Hold Your Hand, which was their first #1 on the Billboard. Remember, we're talking about America, not Europe, in the Billboard Hot 100, which is the pop chart, all-time pop chart until today. And well, that was called the British invasion, because there was actually an invasion of British bands afterwards. The Who, and well, one day we can talk about the Europe pop scene, but this was the like the breaking point in the 60s and nothing else. After the Beatles, I can say that there was like a folk revival music, and you know, artists like Joan Baez or Bob Dylan or even Johnny Cash or these crossover country musicians did their thing. But in terms of pop, general, worldwide, global, the word global didn't exist yet, but I say global artists. We're talking about the Beatles because they were the global artists in the 60s. And after that, in the by the late 60s, they were like they had like a very, very fast famous band, and by the late 60s they were almost like tired, and they split up a couple of years later. So this is the 60s. I can say the 60s is the Beatles and also the Rolling Stones. Of course, the Rolling Stones, there's a lot about like a battle, like, you know, like the 90s, which we will talk about that. The Oasis and Blur, well, that's the same. But I think this is like more like a, you know, think of the media trying to put them like, you know, like enemies or something. But for me, I love them all. I love the Stones. I love the Beatles. They're beautiful. And well, this is the 60s. Now entering into the 70s, the things started to change. I think the breaking point here is this man sitting behind the piano. Until these days, we have him. It's like a legend. It's Elton John. 1970, he had his first #1 hit, which is Your Song. If you don't know that song, go right now, listen to that song. It's called Your Song on Spotify. That was his first #1 hit in America. He was famous and became popular in America, even maybe not first in his home country, but first in America and afterwards in Europe. I don't know why, but he had a, yeah, like a frantic, like a huge career. He released singles, I don't know, month after month. He was a great, he is, sorry, he's a great performer. That was the beginning of the 70s, but there's a lot to talk about because by the mid 70s, there's a big breaking change. But this is for the next episode, okay? If you want me to talk about something in particular about the 80s, leave your comments below and tell me what do you think about that? But what do you think about the 60s, huh? And the early 70s? But the next episode is going to be about the 70s. Great, great decade. See you guys. Thank you. Well, to my subscribers and my students, bye-bye. Take care.